Hello everyone, AAA Gamer here. Waiting for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild to finally launch and get in my our hands feels just like waiting for this guy to move. Speaking of, do you know how long left until it launches? Yeah, that's right. I had to do it. I just keep on getting more and more heights with each passing day, and with only a week left, I'm now here to share my latest timeline theory. First off, I want to apologise for my attitude in my recent videos. I know I tend to overthink things and I just get so worked up about the timeline. My theories can sometimes be fairly accurate, like the one I had about the subtitle is somewhat correct. Breath can also be a reference to the blue magic of the Sheikah. But this? The timeline? It's all so frustrating. But hey, the title isn't wrong. I always make sure to have the information I need prior to these things, but I went full out on the research this time. Also look back to my previous videos and laughed at my stupidity. So while I won't take back some of the things I said, the timeline is bullshit, Nintendo are trolling us, and it could be anywhere on the timeline at this point. I just want to make clear where my views on the timeline placement lies and fix up some little details. Get ready, because this is a long one. Now I want to make two things clear. I started with Ocarina of Time, so my knowledge on the first few games, lore and such is pretty small. Yes, I've played, beaten and loved them all except for Adventure of Link because I found that really difficult. I wouldn't be a true Zelda fan if I didn't play and beat them, but the lore isn't ingrained in my memory like Ocarina of Time and games following. Most of the information on these I got from Hyrule Historia, which I only recently fully read. It's where most of my research comes from. The other thing? I'm going to avoid most spoilers in this video. I already know everything revealed so far, unfortunately. I would have liked to stay spoiler free on the first dungeon, but I'm that hyped I want to see and know everything. One or two of these things I could have used as evidence as well, like a boss's name, but I left them out so everyone could see this theory, no worries. But I will touch on Aonuma's interviews, specifically his hints on the timeline placement. So, yeah. I'll get one of them out of the way immediately. Slight spoilers here, folks. Aonuma has stated the obvious. Breath of the Wild is in fact after Ocarina of Time. So this narrows it down to, what, roughly 3/4 of the timeline? Oh, and no fourth timeline either. Not unless there's another split from Ocarina of Time or a later game we don't already know about. Now HMK has a theory on this, but no matter how convincing he is, I just can't see it happening. And I do like the idea of a fourth timeline split from Ocarina of Time as well. But what HMK is saying is that Link would decide to stay in the adult timeline and technically prevent the child-adult split from happening, rendering at least half of the entire timeline a what-if scenario, similar to Dragon Ball GT. Granted, Zelda's alternate timelines are much better than Dragon Ball's, and the Downfall timeline is already a what-if timeline, scenario, whatever you want to call it, and it's still there, an alternate timeline that's still moving at its own pace. And yet, I can't see how else a fourth split would happen. It can happen, I could be wrong, I'll swallow my pride and take the loss, but for now I'm just going to deny it like I did the adult timeline. Yeah, I can't just accept HMK's terms and deny what I said about Ganondorf's wish previously, since everything after Ganon's death in Ocarina of Time is a cutscene or several. But it's mostly because even though I like the idea of a fourth timeline split, it would just make the timeline that much more confusing and messed up than it already is. Do we really want more timelines? It is a cool idea, but really? I'm not changing my prediction of the Downfall timeline and am okay with the child timeline. What we know about Breath of the Wild supports both timelines pretty heavily in many ways. Locations, architecture, Wolf Link, similarities to the first game. I'd honestly prefer this than a fourth timeline. What I'm changing is where on the Downfall timeline Breath of the Wild takes place. My theory of it anyway. Now, I did say in my initial timeline theory that to get the proper placement, the best thing is to ignore some facts. But both the goddess Hylia and the Sheikah are pretty much gone and forgotten by the time of Ocarina of Time. So how in the Sacred Realm can Breath of the Wild take place after Ocarina of Time if both of those are now big deals again? I am so over this shit. But I'm not here to complain. No, not this time. More to correct my statements on these two things. I can overlook the Sheikah. One survivor could have revived the clan, or they might have been underground or something the whole time. That's fine. But the Hylia thing? Yeah, not so much. Or so I initially thought. I originally planned to slam Nintendo's choice of lore here. Despite first appearing in Skyward Sword, there were references to Hylia prior to the game, the name of the land and its people mostly, meaning Aonuma or Miyamoto or whoever writes the stories must have had Hylia planned out from the very beginning. I apologise if I'm butchering the names here. And unless there was a cult or religion or something hiding Hylia's presence, there's no way to explain why she was forgotten and only brought back just for Breath of the Wild. But there are some details that crept into my mind while working on this. The first was when I was watching the Switch presentation trailer again and seeing Zelda bathing in the spring we now know as the Earth Spring from Skyward Sword. If the spring serves the same purpose, it does make sense how they could only now remember Zelda through Zelda the importance of the goddess, seeing as she is the reincarnation of the goddess. Now this one bites my complaining ass if it's true. The other detail came to me while playing through Twilight Princess HD again. I reached the decayed Temple of Time and remembered some details about it. It's been discovered that the Temple of Time on the Great Plateau is indeed the same temple from Ocarina of Time, since the ruins of Castle Town can be found outside it. But what's with the Hylia statue inside? It wasn't there in the first place. Well, what's with the two Guardian statues in Twilight Princess's ruined Temple of Time? And where was the pedestal of the 3 sacred stones in Twilight Princess? I've also been playing through Ocarina of Time 3D. I'm that hyped. It's not so much Nintendo messing with things. Like each game and their unique art styles, it could simply be Nintendo are just redesigning the Temple of Time each time, no matter how ruined it is. Say, without the Ocarina of Time, Rauru or whoever had to figure out another way to open the door and decided on the 2 Guardian statues, despite the temple having been destroyed by Ganondorf at the time. I still think the references to the goddess Hylia are too shallow for her to just be a big deal again, but I'm not completely dismissing it with the way Nintendo are dealing with things like this. So my point is kind of the obvious. With each game comes new art style, comes new designs for all the buildings and everything, and that's just the way Nintendo are doing it. They are redesigning everything to suit the game, and that includes Hylia and the Sheikah in Breath of the Wild. So one thing probably going through your mind right now is the question, if that is the Temple of Time, then why isn't the Master Sword there? I actually have a theory on that. I honestly don't think, unless Breath of the Wild takes place in the child timeline before Twilight Princess, that the sword's pedestal we saw in Breath of the Wild is the original pedestal. I think it was taken to the Great Deku Tree for protection after what happened. This could also mean, if Breath of the Wild takes place in the Downfall timeline, that the Hylians could have lost Hyrule Castle and the Temple of Time in that era and taken the Master Sword to a new resting place, where it was found much later by Link to the Past's Link and only just found again now in Breath of the Wild. Or vice versa if Breath of the Wild is before Link to the Past, but you get the idea. It's a far-fetched theory, but Miyamoto, Aonuma, no one has actually said that the Master Sword can only survive in its original pedestal, or that there's only one. I mean, Fire and the Master Sword weren't placed back into the sword's original pedestal at the end of Skyward Sword. It was placed in a new pedestal in the Sealed Temple. The Pedestal of Time, if you want to call it that. We know from lore and the like it's always the same pedestal in the Temple of Time, or whatever it is, Hyrule Castle and Wind Waker for example. The sword being in that specific pedestal protects time, the Sacred Realm, the Triforce, all that stuff. But this is the downfall timeline I'm theorising about, where it has yet to be explicitly stated if Link to the Past and Link Between Worlds Lost Woods pedestal is the pedestal the Master Sword belongs in, or if it's there for a reason. The only thing we know is what the Link to the Past manual says, which is the location of the Master Sword was forgotten, meaning it could have been taken away and hidden, which is why it's in the Lost Woods, possibly taken to the Hero of Time's home in the forest. Interesting. Now I also want to fix my original timeline placement theory. I said it's the first game on the Downfall timeline, possibly the Imprisoning War or before it, but maybe not. It could still be the first game on the Downfall timeline. My theory about the Master Sword does suggest that. But I'm now willing to bet Breath of the Wild could also be a sequel to the NES games. Yeah, I get it, there are facts against this, but the old man does call the Great Plateau the birthplace of the Kingdom of Hyrule. Maybe after the events of the NES games, the Hylians spread out and reclaimed old land, reconnected with the other tribes and so forth. Now here is where my recent research bears fruit. Hyrule Historia points out that no one appeared who was able to wield the Triforce, and Hyrule divided again and again, continuing to shrink. This is the point it makes for the original Zelda's small map. Then, after telling the events of the first game, it says, even after defeating Ganon, Link remained in the kingdom and lent a hand to the reconstruction efforts. Explaining the map of Adventure of Link, there is a passage that reads, Link's adventures does not take place in Hyrule alone, and his travels bring him to two vast continents. The North Castle lies in the northeast, while Death Mountain, once the lair of Ganon, to the southwest. Many years after they sealed away the demonic thief Ganondorf, the sages live on in names of towns, Rauru, Ruto, Saria, Naburu, and Darunia. I'm sorry if I butchered those names. Now there are some interesting points here. When talking about the first game's map, the passage says the location of Hyrule Castle is unclear. Now there is a North Castle, and it's where Princess Zelda 1 slept during Adventure of Link. So could this be Hyrule Castle? Could it have been lost when the land shrunk and they only reobtained it after Adventure of Link? Not likely. It is called the North Castle for a reason. But if Breath of the Wild is here on the timeline, it could be the castle they relocated to, which would also serve as an explanation for the location of the castle in Breath of the Wild and why it isn't where the birthplace of the Kingdom of Hyrule is. But there's also the town names and Death Mountain. The Hyrule we know from Ocarina of Time clearly lost some areas like Death Mountain and became the lesser Hyrule we know in the original Legend of Zelda game. Clearly those who left Hyrule and the other races also built up their own land and lore during the time as well. Could this be the case with Breath of the Wild's world? Could we revisit Rauru in Breath of the Wild? Also, since Hyrule can shrink, it should be able to grow larger as well. Also, if Adventure of Link took place in more than just a lesser Hyrule, maybe Breath of the Wild will have more than just Hyrule too, since the world is so massive. There is one thing said after both NES games and Hyrule Historia that sticks out to me. Obviously, Hyrule Historia came out before Link Between Worlds was released, so it could be referring to games like that. But it talks about how the power of the gods had been restored to Hyrule through the courage of a young boy. Did generations pass full of peace and the light of prosperity? Or did the curtain rise on an age of darkness when people quarrelled in their search of power? The future of this timeline has yet to be unravelled. I thought Nintendo were done with the Downfall timeline though, calling it a hypothetical timeline or something. Aside from direct sequels like Link Between Worlds, that is. And I did say in a previous video that the Downfall timeline has more than enough games and Ganon resurrections on it. But again, slight spoilers. Aonuma has said there are clues like the old lady from the trailer mentioning the repeated attacks from Ganon, and we can imagine roughly what period it is. Which leads me, and I'm sure many other people, to this conclusion. Maybe after 2 victories over Ganon and his minions, the Hylians managed to take back their land, make it bigger, prosper with the other races, and set the world for Breath of the Wild. If we are seeing past scenes in the trailers, it does look to me like the world was already pretty desolate aside from Hyrule Castle. Also, for reference purposes, the adult timeline features 2 similar passages. The first at the end of Wind Waker says, "The curtain thus fell on the clinical history of the sacred realm of Hyrule and the struggle for the Triforce." The second, after Spirit Tracks, says, "The ancient realm was destroyed, and the wind guided the founders of Hyrule to a new land where the kingdom set off down another path." This in no way means they're done with this timeline, but more so unless another direct sequel or a prequel to Wind Waker appears, which some theorise Breath of the Wild could be. They are done with this version of Ganondorf here, but not other versions of Demise's Curse. Keep this in mind, by the way. The passage also mentions that, with the lineage of the gods not yet exhausted, who can say what successive generations will bring? The story will continue to unfold. Yeah, we already know that already with the likes of Meliodas from Spirit Tracks, who's the 3rd known Demon King after Demise and Ganondorf. Spirit Tracks' successor someday? I wish. I love trains. On that note, it's time to move on to the child timeline. Now, the passage at the end of Four Swords Adventures in Hyrule Historia says, "There may come a time when the land will have need of the Four Sword again." Basically saying any game set around Four Swords Adventures would use the Four Sword again rather than the Master Sword. But interestingly, it's what Hyrule Historia says about Four Swords Adventures Ganon. Now, this is something I've been theorising lately, asking if every Gerudo King is named Ganondorf, but I wasn't actually aware that it's already been done. And this is what I meant to keep in mind. During the story of Four Swords Adventures in Hyrule Historia, there is a passage that says relations between Gerudo Village and Hyrule had become friendly once more, and peace had been restored to the land. However, one day a new Ganondorf was born into the world. He violated the laws of the town, trespassing into an ancient pyramid and taking possession of the trident. The final passage then says the evil sorcerer Vati had become caught up in the cycle of Ganondorf the thief. Will the light world never be free of the threat of darkness? This means Ganondorf is well and truly dead after Twilight Princess, that there can be other Ganons, and that the Ganon we know in Four Swords Adventures is a completely different Ganon to the one we know from every other game. He takes on different looks, forms and the like to suit each game's art style and all that, but Ganon and Ganondorf have always been the same person, except for Four Swords Adventures. I love Four Swords Adventures, yet I never actually noticed this before. I feel like an idiot now. So Calamity Ganon could very likely be the same deal. A completely different entity that took up the name of Ganon after the original Ganon's reign of terror and consequent demise. It could very well be the power of the Ganon we know having escaped his body and running rampant on its own. Hence the cloud-like appearance and named Calamity. But there's another thing to take away from all this talk about the child timeline. Aside from Wolf Link's appearance, there are other elements that support Breath of the Wild being on the child timeline. Four Swords Adventures is the first time we've seen an actual village for the Gerudo rather than a fortress. And from the looks of the trailers, we will traverse a Gerudo village in Breath of the Wild. But there's also things like where Hyrule Castle and the Temple of Time are located in comparison to Twilight Princess's map, and similarities to the fountain areas among other factors. Also, I'll say slight spoilers, but this is actually going back to around Twilight Princess HD's development. Aonuma mentioned that if we played Twilight Princess HD then Breath of the Wild, we would have OIC moments. This is one of his troll moves, since that earlier comment basically screams Downfall Timeline too. To summarise, I'm putting my bets on the Downfall Timeline. Not so much the first game on it, but a sequel to the original NES games. I'm fine with the child timeline since there is just as much evidence for it, and I don't flat out deny the adult timeline or a fourth possible timeline. I just don't like it. I still think the timeline is bullshit, or in other words, a complete mess, and that Nintendo, Aonuma specifically, are trolling us. When asked, he does avoid where Breath of the Wild takes place in the timeline by hinting various points like the examples I gave in this video. But that's probably just me getting worked up over it and probably overthinking things once again. Could also be I'm just upset right now because my Zelda 25th anniversary new 3DS XL or the microSD card in it is fucked, and it's so close to the Switch launch and I've already spent everything I have on that. Thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to me ramble on, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop me a message on my email, Facebook or Twitter accounts found in the links below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to like, subscribe and all that crap. See you later.